Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, you just can't escape yourself? You're just always going to be the way you are right now. Nothing's going to change. All the dreams that you have, you're not going to fulfill them because you're just stuck being you and you just can't help it. You're going to be you no matter what, and there's nothing you can do about it. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to change that, right? We're going to talk about how to change yourself. We're going to talk about making some of those changes at a core level that are really, really, really hard to make. But before we get to that, make sure that whatever platform you're watching this video on, you use the tools of that platform to engage. If that's YouTube, that means subscribing to the channel. If that's Instagram, sharing it with your friends, sharing it to your story, using the heart emoji, all that good stuff. Whatever platform you're on, make sure that you engage. Okay, let's dive into the topic of how to change yourself. You know, one thing that's really helped for me, one thing that I've talked about in several of my books, when it comes to learning how to change yourself, you have to first at least begin to identify the patterns in yourself and identify some of the things that you might think about like at a deep subconscious level that are keeping you unable to change, right? So there's all these different things that make up who you are. They're your experiences, they're your beliefs, they're these scripts that get planted in your head from different areas, right? So one of the ways you can work on changing yourself, on reinventing yourself, first you have to unearth that and really understand what's going on with you. What's that story that you're telling yourself or that you're being told? What is that persistent narrative that lies below the surface that's just stuck in so deep that it's difficult for you to change? For me, I had a narrative that, I was always someone who would start things but would never finish them, right? I didn't see myself as someone who could fully execute on their ideas. There's a lot of different experiences in my life that led up to that. Me trying a bunch of things and not following through with them. Me quitting whenever something was difficult and I couldn't easily coast through it with my intelligence. A lot of different experiences in my life led to having that narrative. But until you actually take time to think and focus on what's actually going on with you, it's hard to figure out what to identify, what to pinpoint, what to change. So one exercise that I like having people do is taking time to actually write down some of those hidden beliefs, some of those internal scripts that are kind of running you that you pretty much know what they are, but you haven't actually articulated them. So what's going on in your life? Write down 5 scripts that might be running at your head in a subconscious level. One thing I like to do is use morning pages and write down 3 pages of just free-form thought and really unearth the things that are going on inside of my mind. So you have to identify what needs to be attacked first so that you can actually do something about it, right? So once you've identified the patterns that run you, that keep you in the same spot, you move on to step 2. What you do after that, after you identify the patterns that are running you, identify everything that's led up to this kind of unshakable sense of who you are right now and you're looking to change, you have to find some sort of counter narrative or a counter action that's going to change that narrative, right? So take, for example, me, who used to look at myself as someone who can never finish anything, right? Well, I just thought about it and I was like, what are some of the ways that I could change that narrative? And I just went through this process of thinking about other people who have been in similar situations as I am, who started and failed at a lot of different things, but then eventually found something that clicked. So I would look for examples like that. I would think to myself, I'd question my own narratives, like, are you really someone who's incapable of finishing things? Or is it that you've not found the thing that works best for you? Lo and behold, all of a sudden, I channel my energy into things I'm really, really interested in instead of some of the things society scripted me to want. And all of a sudden, I could finish things. I could write books. I could do videos. I could become someone who talks about motivation and discipline after living a life where I had no motivation and discipline because I found something that I was interested in. So you have to find a way to counter those narratives. And one thing I can do for you is counter the narratives that are running in your mind right now. And I could tell you that everything that you think about yourself, these patterns that run really, really deep, one good thing to counter them is just to realize that they're totally imaginary, right? And that's not going to help you in the moment. Understanding that the beliefs that make you feel the way you are, that make you feel stuck, me just telling you that they're imaginary, that's not going to help you in the moment. But one thing I do with myself when I have narratives that are running me is I constantly tell myself that they're BS. I spend so much time whenever I'm trying to change a part of myself that I'm stuck with. I just hammer home that thought over and over and over again. Like, you don't have to believe the scripts that are running you. You don't have to accept those limiting beliefs. You don't have to accept that your narrative of the way the world works is real. You don't have to accept it. And you're going to want to accept it because it's so deeply embedded, but you can continue to attack it with counter narratives, counter examples. If you feel like a loser, you can find people who used to be losers and who became winners. If you feel like you're someone who's lazy, you can find people who used to be lazy and are now motivated. You can look and see examples around you of people who have changed so that you can counter some of those deep-seated beliefs. So step one, you got to identify what's really, really at the root. Like, you know the basic gist of what's going on with you, but really take some time to articulate that. Step two, find some ways to counter those scripts and have the underlying belief, the logical assumption that those things are not real and that they're just your interpretation of events. So after you do those next two things, you have to move on to step three, which is the process of actually changing yourself. The next phase of really what you have to do to change yourself, you have to find a way to let go, right? So there's this sense of yourself that you've built up, an identity that you've built up for such a long period of time. And like, you can go through the process where you've questioned it and now you really kind of know that you can move in a different direction, but you still ultimately have to let go of that identity. And that can be really, really difficult because even if you don't like your life, you like feeling like you have some semblance of sense. You like feeling that you can make sense of who you are, right? So a lot of people create these negative identities about themselves and then they cling to them because it helps them cope. It helps them to not face the fact that they could have been doing something differently all along, right? So someone tells themselves a story about the way the world works, and they use that to cope because the other message is almost more devastating. The message is that, you never had to be lazy. You could have just been motivated. You never had to be so fearful and timid. You could have just took the steps to be brave. Like, you didn't have to live your life this way. Those characteristics were not so deeply ingrained in you that you were forced to live that way. You were choosing to live that way, right? And that's just really hard to bear, right? I always talk about this. It's hard to admit that you've been mismanaging your life. It's hard to admit that the stories you've been telling yourselves are just copes, and that if you would just change them and do something differently, then your life would get better. So you have to let go of all of that. And the hardest part of letting go is really just the fact that you have to accept the fact that you wasted time. You wasted a lot of time being something that you didn't have to be. And it caused you to get bad results. You may have wasted months, weeks, years of your life. But you have to accept that. And a lot of people don't want to do that. We'd rather just continue to prolong the suffering instead of just admitting that we wasted time and that the sunk costs need to go. It's kind of like when you're in a relationship, you get into a relationship and then you spend the second half of the relationship getting out of the relationship because you knew halfway through that it wasn't for you, but you had been doing it so long that you just wanted to keep doing it. That's kind of, that's the way we have a relationship with ourselves. But we tend to just keep that relationship going forever and never making those changes because we just don't want to face the facts. So just let it go. You wasted time. You could have been living a different life and you just didn't do what it took to get there, but then you can move on to the next phase. And the next phase is you just change your life, right? I can't fit it all into a 10, 15-minute video, a whole process of how to change your life. But I try to think of some of the things that happen. I try to think of some of the things that happened for me that made it possible. One thing I talk about a lot is I just spent a bunch of time thinking about my future and realizing that I just didn't want it to be that way. I found something really interesting and compelling to work on to kind of be that keystone habit for the rest of my life, and that was finding writing. So this is why I encourage you to find something you're good at. Make sure that you're focusing on areas of your life where you can build upon your strengths, and that'll really help you change and move towards that more self-actualized version of yourself. And then you have to remember that there's always just going to be a day one in your life where you go on a long streak of doing things really, really well. And there's just that origin point. And for it, sometimes it clicks for some people, sometimes it doesn't. For me, it happened, almost 6 years ago now, where I just made a decision that I was going to pivot my life in a different direction. That could happen for you today. It could happen next week. It could happen a year from now. And the good news is it can still happen after like 999 failed attempts at changing. I know you think that, you've tried to change so many times before and you've messed it up so many times before that you just throw up your hands and like, dude, I tried to change my life so many times. It's not working. Why keep trying? Because you never know. Because the time's going to pass anyways, as the famous cliche goes. So there will come a day when where you'll start to change and you'll do some of the things that I've talked about in many of my videos. I've talked about, spending a dedicated amount of time blitzing towards that change. So usually, that's somewhere from 30 to 90 days. Then after you've built some new habits in that window, you've built a new direction in that window, that's when you can really start to build on top of what you've been doing and move to where you're making really a permanent identity shift and you're getting a lot of the results that you want in your life. So to recap, step one, take some time to really, really think and articulate some of the patterns, scripts, and beliefs that are running your life. 2, question those narratives to death and make sure that you always realize that those beliefs are BS. 3, let go. As much as you've been hanging on to it for years, you have to let go of your identity. 4, start the steps on a very long journey, but a very fruitful journey of changing your life. And then a great start would be reading my book, Real Help, An Honest Guide to Self-Improvement. This goes into a bunch of depth about ways that you can change your life, so make sure to check that out. Should be in the description on YouTube, available in a link on all other platforms that you're seeing this. Make sure to watch some other videos from the channel. Had a blast doing this, and I will see you on the next video.